I'm Gloria Ge, Deputy Director of Griffith Asian Institute. It is our great honor to host today's interview or webinar. We have an incredible panel here. I will leave Professor Sue Traveskis, today's moderator, to introduce our speakers. I'll only use 1 minute to introduce our Griffith Asian Institute, as many of our participants here are from outside of Griffith University. Griffith Asian Institute is an interdisciplinary research institute. We focus on addressing new opportunities and major challenges in Asia and the Pacific to foster the region's progress and leadership in sustainable development. Through our public events like Perspective Asia and webinar like today, we aim to serve as a channel for enhancing communication and understanding, and also provide a platform to foster public discussion on current issues in our region. Without further ado, I will pass the microphone to Professor Sue Traveskis.
Thank you, Gloria. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sue Traveskis, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Eminent Chinese studies scholar Steve Tsang's latest book, The Political Thought of Xi Jinping, which he has co-authored with Olivia Cheung, is the most comprehensive book to date on the Xi Jinping era of ideology in China. So we're so lucky to have him here online this afternoon or early morning in the UK. And for those who are not so familiar with the Chinese studies landscape, I'll just explain that Steve Tsang is a professor of Chinese studies and director of the China Institute at SOAS London. He's previously served as head of School of Contemporary Chinese Studies and director of the China Policy Institute at the University of Nottingham. And I'm sure all our Australian attendees on this webinar today will know who Rowan Callick is, who, in my opinion, is one of the world's best China correspondents. Rowan is an industry fellow at the Griffith Asia Institute here at Griffith University, among other positions. He also holds at ANU and the University of Melbourne. So what's going to happen today is that Rowan is going to put on his journalist hat for this afternoon's conversation with Steve on the political thought of Xi Jinping, and he'll ask Steve a series of questions. And we're in for a treat, I'm sure. Now, Rowan and Steve are going to be talking for around 40 to 45 minutes, and then we're going to have some time for questions from the audience. So could you put your questions in the Q&A, and I will read them out later on. Thank you. Over to you, Rowan.
Thanks very much, Sue. And hi, everyone. It's fantastic to be here. Steve, a hearty congratulations to you and Olivia. This is such a helpful book for people like me. This is a huge project to distill into a single pithy volume key aspects of the voluminous output of Xi thought since he became General Secretary of the party. Material sufficient to have been crammed into a new book by Xi roughly every month since then. How on earth did you and your colleague and co-writer Olivia Cheung set about tackling such a monumental task? Steve, you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. And thank you very much, Rowan and Sue, Gloria, and the Asia Institute. I think we start off thinking about this book by reading everything that has been published in Xi Jinping's name that are publicly available. And there are a huge amount of them. And having read what he has said, then it's a question of how we frame it to make sense of what he has said in ways perhaps that he may not himself have clearly articulated. Our objective was not simply to put the version of ideology that Xi Jinping would like us to understand. I mean, that's clearly something that we take on board as well. But to make sense of what he actually has said and is logic inherent in what he actually said, and give it a kind of structure so that people can understand what are the main thrust and ideas and principles of what we would call the political thought of Xi Jinping. Again, we use the term the political thought of Xi Jinping deliberately to make it clear that we are not simply regurgitating what Xi Jinping would like us to think of as the Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era.
Thank you, Steve. And a question that springs to mind automatically from people who are looking at this particularly from Western countries is, why does such thought matter? No one is parsing the thought, such as it is, of other leaders of our era, those in the West, say Starmer there in Britain, or Trump, or here Albanese, or Dutton. If ideology and its discourse are sincerely central for Xi, why is that?
Well, it certainly is sincerely central in terms of importance to Xi Jinping and to the Communist Party of China. I think where we have to start off is to remind ourselves that the political system in place in China is a fundamentally Leninist political system. And a Leninist political system needs an ideology to make it function effectively and efficiently. And that was the commitment Xi Jinping had made. And by the end of his first term of office in 2017, at the 19th Party Congress, Xi Jinping came out very, very clearly that he intends to make that reinvigoration of the Leninist system work very effectively and very powerfully. And he also, at that point, articulated that he is putting forward this, what he called the Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. So at that point, it becomes blatantly obvious to me that this is something that we have to take seriously. And that ideology, as we study it, becomes even clearer as something central to how Xi Jinping intends to govern China for the rest of his time in office, which probably means for the rest of his time alive. So we're talking about a longish time frame ahead, and that ideology will provide a clear guidance for the Communist Party and for everybody else in China in what they do. And here we are coming through with our research that Xi Jinping really aims to create in China a reality of one country, one people, one ideology, one party, and one leader. You cannot do that without an ideology making people to think the same way and move in the same direction.
Thank you very much, Steve. And what do we know of the process of the development of Xi thought? Do we know anything about the members of the team responsible for producing so much work, whether they comprise a single perennial group, whether the personnel may be shift according to the topic, or the extent of the role of Politburo Standing Committee member and kind of guru for the last decade or more, Wang Huning? Or do we know about the personal role played by Xi himself in setting the agendas or deciding the outcomes of the next piece of research or the next book? Do they do any road testing within the wider party before publication? That often used to be a thing under previous leaders, or are the elements of this ideology simply stated with the requirement that party members and the broader population must learn and follow? Do we know anything about all these questions, Steve?
Well, we do know something about some of those questions. I don't think we know the details of everything that you have listed. And I will start off by saying that I think you hit the nail on the head at the beginning of this webinar by underlying the volumes of output that Xi Jinping had put out when he was governing at the time the most populous country in the world. Even a superhuman could not produce that level of output that Xi Jinping was producing on a daily basis. So it's blatantly obvious he was supported by a strong team of people who were drafting all these materials for Xi Jinping beforehand. And at the head of that drafting team is Wang Huning. Now, what we know about Wang Huning, I think, matters, because Wang Huning was a professor at Fudan University back in the 1990s, handpicked together with one of his other colleagues, another professor at Fudan, by Jiang Zemin to take to Beijing to work with him, and was a significant contributor to Jiang Zemin's theory of 3 represents. And he stayed on to serve Hu Jintao and contributed to Hu Jintao's scientific outlooks, and is now the single most important person helping to draft the thought of Xi Jinping. And if you look at and contrast what the Xi thought says and what Jiang Zemin's 3 represents says, they are on the other side. They are on the 2 sides of the ideological spectrum in the Chinese Communist Party. And this is somebody who was equally comfortable drafting for Jiang Zemin the 3 represents and for Xi Jinping of his Xi thought. So this is not somebody who is going to be putting forward a lot of ideas purely of his own and try to get the boss to go along with it. This is a grand master who second guess what the boss wants. And this is, I think, what we really need to understand about the drafting process of Xi Jinping thought. Xi might not have personally drafted them all, but he read, approved, and decides to articulate everything that was being put in his name. And it therefore makes it almost not terribly important as to who, as an individual or a particular group within the Communist Party, who prepare which particular part of the text for Xi Jinping, because they will all prepare second-guessing what Xi Jinping would like to be said and put it in a language that Xi Jinping would like to be seen. Again, bear in mind that Xi Jinping was not a particularly well-educated person because of he being caught up in the Cultural Revolution. And yet he likes to be seen as respected and admired as the great intellectual thinker of the Chinese tradition. So a lot of those language being used in Xi thought, Xi is not himself so familiar with, but he liked them to be put, and the people who draft them put those language out there for him.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a great picture you painted here. You know, one would love to be a kind of fly on the wall watching this operation sometimes. The Xi Jinping thought that everyone in China has to study is, of course, in general terms, the one you've already named, Socialism with Chinese Characteristics for a New Era. I wonder, appreciating that that's not, your book isn't restricted to this particular version of Xi thought, but nevertheless, it's pretty important. Pretty well everyone in China has to study this. What does Xi primarily mean by socialism, do you think? What's his understanding of Chinese characteristics? Maybe an elusive concept. And then, of course, the apocalyptic leaning phrase, new era. Grateful for just a bit of a sketch of where are we in those three parts of this particular key thought of his.
Great question, because all three parts matter. They may not matter exactly as one would look at the terms being used and think this is what it is supposed to mean. We have to understand where Xi Jinping comes from to understand what he actually meant by the three bits. The socialism bit. Xi Jinping time and again say unambiguously that he is a Marxist. He hardly ever refers to the ideology as Marxism-Leninism, only sort of on formal occasions in a kind of pro forma way. But otherwise, he always is a Marxist. And this is extremely misleading because he is the kind of Marxist that if you could bring Karl Marx back from the grave, Karl Marx might have a bit of difficulties recognizing him as a Marxist. Now, what he really and truly is a Leninist. He will do everything that Lenin would be very, very comfortable with. And if anything, he might even be pushing it a bit further in his logical conclusion in the emphasis on the central importance of the party discipline, and the constant reinvigoration of the party so that the party functions as a Leninist instrument. And if you combine the two bits together, then what you see, as illustrated by Xi Jinping's socialist program, which he calls the common prosperity, you can see that his commitments to Marxism does not go to the extent of the Marxist idea of from home according to ability to home according to needs. Common prosperity is about pushing the rich to share part of their wealth with some of the poor. When you have a Leninist state that can do redistribution just like that. He's emphasized on the central and eternal importance of the Communist Party goes against the other basic Marxist principle that the state will wither away. Under Xi, the Communist Party is not going to wither away at all, ever. So that is the socialism bit. The Chinese characteristic is about Xi Jinping's personal understanding of what Chinese history was. And it was about him combining his version of Marxism-Leninism with his understanding of what the Chinese past was, and coming up with the idea that Marxism-Leninism is the most logical evolution of the Chinese political tradition, which of course he would call Confucianism, which again could not be recognized by Confucius if you could bring him back from the grave over 2,100 plus years ago. But what it does mean is a very centric approach to the ideology. And like that also, of course, goes against the basic Marxist principle of being universal. Xi Jinping has a very Sino-centric interpretation of Marxism-Leninism, different from the Mao Zedong version of the signification of Marxism-Leninism, which was to adopt and adapt Marxism-Leninism to fit the Chinese agrarian context when it did not have a large urban proletariat base for a revolutionary change. The new era simply signifies that Xi Jinping believes that he is the rightful inheritor of the tradition of the Communist Party from the Maoist days, but he is making so much changes to it that it is now something new. It is not about a Maoist restoration, resurrecting some of the Maoist practices, but he is not aiming to restore to the Maoist era. He is not going to imitate Mao. He is putting China on a new stage, something even grander, bigger, more amazing than the Maoist era. And that, of course, implicitly suggests that he really didn't see the Dengist era or the extended Deng Xiaoping era as anything more than an interregnum. Now is the moment.
Now is indeed the moment. Thank you, Steve. Very appropriate that we're having this conversation. Following on from this, how do we place, and in part you've already referred to some areas of this in talking about Wang Huning's contributions under Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. How do we place, but particularly Xi thought in the context of Mao thought, and I'm among many old guys in the West who had a little red book when I was a student and so on. So I don't know if I really imbibed it that seriously, but we know something about Mao thought and a little bit about Deng thought. I wonder the context of Xi thought in those terms. And you described Xi thought, you've talked about it as consultative Leninism, reinvigorated by him to strengthen regime security and party supremacy. Maybe you could explain a little bit also the consultative Leninism, that phrase.
The term consultative Leninism was coined by myself at the tail end of the Jiang Zemin era, at the end of the 90s and the beginning of the noughties. It was meant to encapsulate what the political system effectively was like in the Deng Xiaoping era. Now, Xi Jinping has made so many changes to how the system actually operates. Not the structure of the system. I think the structure of the system largely remains as it was before, but the way how it operates has been changed so much that I have modified the descriptions of it to become a sinocentric consultative Leninism in the book. It's sinocentric consultative Leninism because while a lot of that consultative Leninism dimensions remain, the priorities and the ranking of the defining features of that system has changed. Under the new system, under the new way of operation, there are 5 defining characteristics of this sinocentric consultative Leninism. And the first one is the centrality of the party, with it the core leader. So the single most important thing about the sinocentric consultative Leninism is about the importance of the party governing, leading, running everything, and the superimpose and the creation of a concentric circle of power within that party, that the core of the party, the general secretary of the party, is now the top leader, the supreme leader, and what he thinks is the single most important thing about what the party must do. The two merge together. The second defining characteristic of it is in terms of the party-centric nationalism, that the whole narrative of China and its history and society have now become one that makes it very clear. China is great because of the Communist Party, with its core leader leading and steering everything. Implicitly, it also implies that China could not have achieved what it has achieved without the leadership of the Communist Party. So what is in the best interest of the party is in the best interest of the country, and people in China are nothing unless and until they support and embrace the party's leadership and party's authority, with which also implying, of course, the core leaders. Then the third focus is on governance. But here, again, there is a change in emphasis from the Dengist era consultative Leninism. The Dengist era consultative Leninism focus on governance was about delivering better public service. The Xi Jinping era emphasis on governance is about the party-directed delivery of better governance. And the party-directed elements is what underpins what Xi Jinping says, that it doesn't matter whether it's east, west, north, south, or in the middle. The party leads everything with no if, no buts. So the separation of the state from the party under the Deng Xiaoping era is now being replaced by the party coming back into the government and leading the government. The fourth defining characteristic is about the consultation dimensions of the Sinocentric consultative Leninism. That remains. And at the most important basic level, the consultation is the Maoist principle of the mass line, or is often called from the masses to the masses. And what the mass line is about is to make sure that people are being asked about what they want. And then the party uses its powerful propaganda machinery to get back to the people, to inform them, to educate them, to lead them to believe that what the party actually wants them to think has taken into account what they want. And therefore, the party has delivered what people actually want. So it's a kind of a circular process, but it is important in shaping public opinion, in creating the one people dimension of that oneness formulation I summarized earlier. And the final part of it is the fifth defining feature is economic strength. Again, it contrasts with the Dengist era when it was talking about economic growth that deliver improved living standards to people on a steady basis. The new emphasis is about, it is not about growth, stupid. It's about economic strength, the economic might and power and gravitas of the Chinese economy globally. And therefore, the focus is not on improving the conditions of the little man on a daily basis, but on making some of China's industries absolutely cutting edge, innovative, and globally competitive. And that's what we have seen in a way how the economic focus changed.
Thank you very much. I might just follow up that last remark. Of course, Alibaba might be the best recognized name internationally in terms of such a cutting edge and brilliant Chinese company, but its brilliant founder has been pushed to the margins, and the company has been forced to fragment into 6 constituent parts. Why is that, Stephen? Why having helped foster the creation of such a brilliant, globally recognized company is that now to what sort of put to one side?
Two reasons. One, where Alibaba and a couple of the other companies associated similar to Alibaba in the private sector were allowed to falter. In fact, they were the top poppies that were cut down, was because they were not pushing in the areas which are priority areas for Xi Jinping for the cutting edge, innovative side of it. You don't see, for example, Huawei being in trouble. You don't see the solar power industry in trouble. You don't see the EV sector being in trouble. I mean, you don't see the advanced chips, computer chips area being in trouble, because those are the priority areas that Xi Jinping has identified. E-commerce, e-finance, not really the top priorities for Xi Jinping.
Okay.
He was happy to go along with it, until, of course, Alibaba became so big that Jack Ma could speak out of line, which challenged the authority of Chinese regulators, meaning the Communist Party of China, implying ultimately not being sufficiently respectful of the top leader. And that goes straight back to the Sinocentric consultative Leninism model, that the first defining characteristic is about the authority and the security of the regime, of the party and its core leader. Nobody, not even Jack Ma, would be allowed to show disrespect to that. So once that was being shown by that infamous speech that Jack Ma had made to a distinguished audience, both domestic and international, he has effectively signed his problem warrant.
Thank you, Steve. So to keep on this this theme of sinocentrism, and you write in the book of party-centric nationalism, if I can just push the conversation a little in that direction, and in international relations of Qian Xia commanding everything and heavens and so on. To what extent does Xi thought also embrace, as well as those within this centric set, a form of Han ethnocentrism? And is there scope within China for discussion about these centrisms, party-centric, Qian Xia internationally, and Han ethnocentrism? Or are they also givens that we can't really question, as Jack Ma did to an extent in the economic sphere?
Well, you can certainly not question if you were in China as a Chinese citizen, because you need to be a patriotic Chinese. And a patriotic Chinese is somebody who is defined to think the right thought. If you don't know what to think politically, you are probably not very patriotic. And here, the Hanness and the Chinese-ness have effectively been merged together. I mean, you may like to use the language of whether it is Han-centric. Xi Jinping wouldn't actually use that kind of language. He will simply say, this is Chinese-ness. And Chinese-ness is what really matters. And Chinese-ness applies across the board, across all the ethnic groups in China. And therefore, what you see as problematics in Xinjiang or in Tibet or in Hong Kong really is being seen by Xi Jinping as a determined and selfless act to elevate those people in Xinjiang, Tibet, elsewhere, Hong Kong, to be able to be proper patriotic Chinese. And if it means making the Uyghurs more mainstream Chinese, and mainstream Chinese is of course based on the Han culture and norm, and making people in Hong Kong who are political underdeveloped because they were misguided by all these corrupting thoughts of Western ideas of democracies and liberalism, to think properly about what is good for them, embracing Xi Jinping thought and Chinese socialism, then it is making them well and proper. To the other part of your question about the conceptualization of Tiansha, this is the ultimate part of Xi Jinping's going back into the history for the Chinese nest of his ideological formulation. Because in his conception, in his reconstruction of Chinese history, the best of time in human histories were when China was the world's leading, greatest, most powerful, technologically advanced, and best managed power, a power that was such a good force for China and the world that countries outside of China will look up to it, defers to it, embrace its leadership, and Pax Sinica prevail. So all under heaven, under Tiansha, peace prevail. That's the ideal world order. So in that concentric circle construction that I mentioned previously, the concentric circles of Xi Jinping as the core of the Communist Party and the middle inner circle with an outer circle of the Communist Party, and then beyond that China, and beyond that the fourth circle is the rest of the world. They are all supposed to be the same. What's best for the core goes all the way to the best for the rest of the world. So that represents a kind of new approach to thinking about the international order. There is no reason in Xi Jinping thought why the post-war liberal international order, an international order which would be, from his perspective, of the West, by the West, and for the West, should be embraced by the rest of the world, because it was not taking into account the best interests of the rest of the world. Whereas the Tiansha paradigm, by definition, looks after everybody, as long as everybody else accepts and respects the leadership of China.
Thanks very much. What a great encapsulation, Steve, of that complex idea and intriguing idea. When going backwards to Xi's emergence as leader, the thing that he was best known for when he became General Secretary was to be a corruption buster. And it appeared that that's one of the things that really attracted the then party elders to bring him up to the top job. To what extent is there a discernible difference in current power elite thinking in China, though, between the concepts known in English as corruption and disloyalty? Have they emerged as being, maybe they always have in some party thinking, are they in effect the same in terms of how those concepts play out under Xi?
Well, this is the really clever bit of Xi Jinping as a political leader in China and in the Communist Party. Because when he became the top leader in 2012 as General Secretary of the Communist Party, he launched the anti-corruption campaign in a language that members of the party and its elite understood the term anti-corruption in more or less the same way you and I understand it outside of China. And The one little proviso was, of course, that in the Chinese bureaucratic tradition, a new leader starting office often make some changes for a while to mark it, and it will all peters out and then be forgotten, and we get back to how we have always done things. So Xi Jinping let them think what they wanted to think, when he had always intended to understand it in a different way. For Xi Jinping, the anti-corruption drive was always an operation with two dimensions. One was the anti-corruption drive. Two, it was a party ratification drive. And I use my words here carefully. The publicly billed was an anti-corruption campaign, implying that it was something that was started with a termination date somewhere, somehow coming up at some stage. A drive does not necessarily have a termination date. And with the anti-corruption drive and the party ratification drives being put together, then the issue of loyalty, not only loyalty to the party, but loyalty to the supreme leader, would become an issue. And every single tiger that was taken down in the first 10 years of Xi Jinping's rule were leaders who were not being deemed as sufficiently loyal to Xi Jinping himself. Not one single protege of Xi Jinping elevated to ministerial rank and above was taken down, even though a couple of hundreds were taken down in that 10 years period. And that shows you how much the anti-corruption drive was helpful to Xi Jinping in consolidating his control. And in the Chinese system, you have a reality that no ministerial rank cadre is being paid a salary that can maintain a reasonable standard of living expected of somebody of a ministerial standing. So everybody is vulnerable. But they also then quickly realize that only certain people who tick the other box for the party ratification drive, were in fact truly vulnerable. Now that changed after Xi Jinping started his third term. But by the time he started his third term, there were very few non-Xi Jinping proteges in high offices any longer. So if he was serious about it, he would have to start taking down some of his own people, and he has.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve. My last question, and I should say very interesting, when Wang Qishan, if you remember, was appointed, he was Xi's kind of closest ally, and people thought, oh, he was appointed the head of the Central Commission for Disciplinary Inspection. And I remember people at the time saying, oh, that shows Wang is out of favor. But what it showed, of course, was disciplinary inspection and the anti-corruption drive or anti-disloyalty drive was in fact being elevated to the central place in the political realm. So very interesting to have seen that happening. The last question I have is, what next? What will what will she think of next? And going on from there, as important, what is Steve Tsang's next thought in terms of research or a book?
Well, I can't tell you what Xi Jinping's next thought would be. I have no way of second guessing what he is going to come up with next. But I think the general direction of travel of Xi Jinping thought has already been spelled out. I mean, one of the things I did writing that book was that I mean, the project started in 2017 after the 19-party Congress. Olivia joined in 2020. And we decided, or I decided, that we would finish the manuscript by the autumn of 2022, knowing full well that we would finish it just before the 20th Party Congress. And the 20th Party Congress did not require us to make real changes to the book. The only thing that was changed was the introduction when I added the what happened at the 20th Party Congress with Hu Jintao into the introduction to give it a human touch to a very dry subject. Now, why do I want to relate to that? Is an assumption I made that by that point, she will have codified the main elements of Xi Jinping thought. So we would have a pretty clear sense of what the main directions are. And I think we have. So what comes next will be more of a refinement and slight modifications rather than significant departure from where I think he is driving us. That gamble I took before 2022, I think has so far paid off, and I suspect that it probably will continue to do so. As to Steve Tsang, Steve Tsang doesn't have the thoughts of his own in a way that we could compare with Xi with his thought. I don't think that I can have it, but what I can say is that following on the Xi Jinping thought book, the next research project that I am doing, the current research I'm doing, again with Olivia playing a very important part, is a book on China's global strategy under Xi Jinping. So it is, if you like, a real focus on what that Tensha conceptualization means and what it is all about and how he tries to secure the eventual transformation of the liberal international order into a Tensha order for the world.
Thank you very much. We look forward immensely to that coming work, Steve. And now I'm passing the reins back to Sue. And Sue, if you can take it from here, thank you.
Oh, what a fabulous conversation. I've got lots of questions, but I don't think I should ask the first question. I think I should throw the first question to someone in our audience. And this is to do with the people, Steve. You were talking about the mass line and you were talking about consultative Leninism. But our first question is this: how is consultative Leninism different from democratic centralism?
Well, there is a huge amount of overlap, but the democratic centralism was fundamentally a Marxist-Leninist principle, which is still very much practiced in the consultative Leninism or Sino-centric consultative Leninism framework being put for the Chinese system post-Mao. Where it differs is in terms of how much more than just democratic centralism is in how the system actually governs. That you have a clearer priority of what China under the Communist Party, whether it was under Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, or Xi Jinping, wants to drive that country overall, whereas democratic centralism simply explains how that political control operates.
Got you. Yep. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up question while others are getting in line to ask their questions? Okay. So you talked a bit about the people. Now, you mentioned mass line and people-centered discourse. So there's a lot of people-centered discourse. So we've got the party is everything on the one end of the spectrum, and then we've got the people-centered discourse on the other. So in addition to this consultative Leninism, what else is people-centered, like people-centered in the way that the Xi Jinping leadership governs? Like, what about governing at the grassroots? How is that people-centered, or how is it expressed in the discourse?
Well, people-centered description that Xi Jinping used is to underline the importance that peoples are in the overall formulation of how the system is supposed to work. You may recall that in the extended Deng Xiaoping era, from the Deng rule through Jiang Zemin to Hu Jintao, we saw a steady increase in the scope of individual freedom in China, that the party was actually loosening its control over people's daily life. The people-centric ones actually puts the party back into more control of what people's thinking is and how they actually needs to behave becomes and its priorities. And it's also a matter of the shift in the substance of the de facto social contract between the Communist Party and people in China after the end of the massacre in Beijing in 1989, usually called the Tiananmen massacres. The old paradigm for the de facto social contract was that the party will monopolize its power. In return, it will give people a bit more individual freedom and steady improvement in people's living conditions. The new paradigm that Xi Jinping has introduced is that the party will make you, people of China, proud of being people of China, proud of being Chinese, proud of China. And that is a very important part of the delivery of the party in return for your enhanced acceptance of party's monopoly of power. And that assertive diplomacy, foreign policy that Xi Jinping has taken, particularly in the last 5 years, has gone a long way in making people in China feel that China is standing taller than ever. And that is part of it.
Ah, that's so interesting. That's a great observation. Thank you so much. Next question, Steve. We'll let you go soon, but we just got a couple more questions. Here's one question. Do you think that outside developments outside China, including the USA's more hostile policies towards China, have they changed Xi's thinking? Not his ideology, but his thinking. He seems to be more interested in a globalized world now in recent years, including significant statements in some particular forums. And so his policy and his words and his actions seem more focused on courting friends and allies, at least in the last couple of years. So the question there is, what is the role of external forces in the way that impacts on policy development or even his thinking?
That reminds me of a simple law of physics. Actions and reactions are equal and opposite. So the external circumstances changes would always have an impact on how a great power, global power like China deals with the rest of the world. The more the Chinese government, Communist Party, or its leader, Xi Jinping, sees the outside world, particularly the West, taking actions and adopting policies which are being seen as unfriendly to China or even hostile to China, will get them to react more strongly in a defensive way. And defensive can very easily transform into aggressive responses. That is really a very, very paper-thin division, moving from one to the other. But what I think we need to recognize is that all great powers have their own agency. A great power which is rising to become a superpower under the transformational leader who believes that he has a historic mission, has more agency than any other great power. And that is what we're dealing with China today. So even if we are not seeing a United States which is taking a much more cautious approach to China, we would be seeing Xi Jinping pushing very hard for delivering his ambitions for China globally anyway. What it will change in how the West react is how China engages, but not the direction of travel or the ultimate goals that she has set for China. He will push unrelentingly for that, whatever the rest of the world does or does not do.
Oh, great answer. Really, really informative. Thank you so much. Can I ask one more question before we finish? Steve, at the beginning, you were talking about ideology as essential to unifying the nation and the party at the beginning of the Xi Jinping era. My question to you is this, or the question is this: why does the Leninist system today, as opposed to, say, 40 years ago, at the Deng era, require such a dense and broad range of ideology when it comes to governance under Xi Jinping? Why is ideology so central today compared to, say, the era before him? There's always been ideology in China, but nothing so dense and so comprehensive as we've seen in the last decade or so. Or to put it in another way, if you take ideology out of the picture, out of the equation, would the structure of governance still be able to operate in China as it does today?
It's really great questions, Sue, if I may say so. And I think we probably need to go all the way back to 1949 to contextualize it, not just the era since Deng Xiaoping. And the reason why I would want to go all the way back to 1949 was that when the PRC was first founded, with Mao Zedong as number one and Liu Shaoqi as number two, Liu Shaoqi was the ultimate Leninist in the original Communist Party leadership. He's the man who was responsible for making sure the Communist Party functioned effectively and efficiently as a Leninist instrument, with Maoism effectively as the ideology for China. And that, of course, went to the dogs during the Cultural Revolution when Liu Shaoqi himself was the primary target of the Maoist attack. When Deng came back at the third plenum of 1978, there was a deliberate attempt to change the way how the system was going to operate. So in the beginning of the 1980s, with Hu Yaobang as General Secretary and Zhao Ziyang as Premier assisting, the party was exploring scopes for changes, including potentially talking about a separation of power between the state and the party. Now, a separation of power between the party and the state will fundamentally change the system from a Leninist system into something that is more like a normal political system with socialist Chinese characteristics. That, of course, didn't get very far and clearly put to an end by the Beijing massacre of 1989. And after that, the Leninist nature of the party remained, but its effectiveness was being steadily eroded by the kind of relaxation that was being allowed as part of that de facto social contract, and also eroded by the increase in corruption within the Communist Party. And it was part of that erosion of the effectiveness of the party as a Leninist instrument and the increase in corruption, which was played very adroitly by Xi Jinping to outmaneuver Li Keqiang and get himself anointed as the successor to Hu Jintao at the 17th Party Congress of 2007. So when Xi became leader, And he started to crack the party whip and started the anti-corruption campaign, even though there were others within the party leadership who thought that anti-corruption campaign could potentially backfire a bit on them. They were welcoming it. I mean, what they didn't realize was that Xi Jinping had no intention of respecting the kind of political conventions and norms that were built up in the Deng Xiaoping era. Namely that if you were a Politburo Standing Committee member, past or present, you would enjoy political immunity for whatever you have done in your entire career. When Xi Jinping took down Zhou Yongkang, that immunity was destroyed. But by that point, it was too late. He had become sufficiently powerful to steer the party to move in the direction he wanted. But it would still take him a couple of years before he completely consolidated his power. I think that point was reached at the 19th Party Congress in 2017.
So good. I understand now that need for ideology to continue past the 2014, 2015, 2016 period. It's so fascinating. Look, we are out of time, and I've just so much enjoyed this conversation. And I would like to, before we thank Steve, I'd like to tell people, if you would like to purchase the book, there's 20% off, and it's the discount expires on the 1st of October. I've got my copy, and I would thoroughly recommend it to everyone. Just before we go, could I just, oh, there we go. Rowan's got his copy too. Just before we go, I would sincerely like to thank you, Steve, for this fabulous hour you've spent with us, and to thank you, Rowan, as well, for thinking of such great questions. I've so enjoyed this, and I'm really glad that it's going to be it is being recorded so that others will be able to hear it too. Now, Steve, you can go off and have some breakfast now if you haven't already, and enjoy your day. And you've been so helpful to us here in Australia. And again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Sue, Gloria, and Rowan. Great pleasure.
Oh, look, thank you. Thank you. And we'll say goodbye to everyone. And thanks a lot, Rowan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rowan. Thank you,
Thanks,
Steve.
Rowan.
Thank you, Sue.
See ya.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Thanks,
bye
Steve.
for now.